When Serena Brooks, a Special Forces soldier, received news that her family was being discriminated against in Red Maple Grove, she believed that patience and a sense of justice would be enough. But when a local police officer drew his gun and pointed it directly at her right on her front porch, Serena realized that the battle at home would be far more brutal than any war zone she had ever faced. Those who proudly brandish the banners of civilization and progress to mask their racism would soon taste the bitter consequences of their deceit. Where are you watching this story from? Write a comment below and help spread the journey for justice. They don't want us here, Serena. And this time, I'm not sure I can hold on any longer. The voice cut through the silent night sharp as a blade, crackling over the phone. Serena Brooks froze over the stack of military paperwork spread across her desk. The bright, familiar lights of the command post now felt harsh and searing. She clenched the phone tighter, feeling the blood in her veins turn to ice. On the other end, Walter Brooks, the man who once taught her that kindness would always be repaid in this country, was speaking in a trembling voice she had never heard before. He spoke of the cold, hostile stares aimed at their house each morning. He spoke of the absurd violation notices piling up on their dining table, a mailbox an inch off center, a gate painted a shade deemed non-compliant, a garden hose deemed too bright a green. He spoke of whispered slurs, of warning glances each time he and her mother stepped outside to water the plants, to buy groceries, or simply to walk their old dog Max. "I don't want your mother to be afraid," he said, his words dragging heavily, each one weighed down by exhaustion. But tonight, someone left a note on the door. "Know your place and leave." In the empty room, Serena sat upright, gripping the phone as if it were the only lifeline still tethering her to everything she loved. She had faced a hail of gunfire, clandestine missions in hostile lands. She had piloted helicopters through the skies ablaze with fire, but never had her heart clenched the way it did now, hearing her father, the rock of their family, sound so broken, like a lost child in his homeland. Walter Brooks hesitated, then spoke words that Serena would carry with her for the rest of her life. "Serena, we need you. Our family needs you." On the line, the sound of cicadas hummed beneath his weary sighs. Serena could feel the despair weaving its way through every pause, tightening its grip around her heart. Outside the barracks, the steady rhythm of soldiers' boots continued. Radios crackled with routine reports. The machinery of war ran without missing a beat. But inside Serena, a storm was gathering. More clearly than ever, she understood that the greatest battle of her life would not be fought on some distant border, but at the doorstep of the home that had raised her. Serena stood, her heavy wooden chair scraping violently against the wall. A few fellow soldiers looked up, startled by the shift in her expression. The woman, known for her cold steel composure, now wearing something raw and uncontainable in her eyes. It wasn't panic, it wasn't fear. It was a silent, seething rage, slow and certain like magma simmering beneath a frozen crust. Without a word, Serena strode to the commanding officer's office. She penned a request for emergency leave in under 5 minutes, her handwriting sharp and unwavering. She submitted it, slung her military pack over her shoulder, and left the barracks like a silent gust of wind. Outside, the night sky stretched deep and familiar, its stars blinking down from the heavens. But, to Serena, they no longer represented freedom or hope. They felt like watchful eyes, bearing silent witness to her first steps into a battle that no rifle or artillery could measure. If I don't go home, who will protect them? If I don't stand up, who will remind Red Maple Grove that the Brooks family has every right to exist equally, rightfully? Serena moved faster, propelled by a rising tide of determination that no force on earth could shake. Somewhere in the distance, The low thrum of helicopter blades began to stir the stillness of the night, carrying the echo of a new mission. This time she wasn't leaving to fight for her country on foreign soil. This time she was going home to fight for her family, her home, and her rightful place on the land she had once sworn to defend. The military SUV came to a halt at the gate of Red Maple Grove on a stifling June afternoon. Serena Brooks stepped out, her boots landing softly on the polished red brick pavement that gleamed like a mask. She lifted her head, taking in the picture her parents had painted for her during hopeful phone calls from afar. A model neighborhood, with neatly trimmed green lawns, American flags fluttering proudly from every porch, and white porch swings swaying gently in the sunlight. But what Serena felt in that first moment was not welcome or peace. It was something heavier, something lurking beneath the spotless bricks and polite smiles, something unspoken but present in every glance, in every door hastily shutting as she passed. She hitched her backpack higher on her shoulder and walked past postcard-perfect lawns. Everything here had been designed to look like a miniature American dream. But when a young mother pushing a stroller abruptly changed direction, pressing her phone tight to her ear as if Serena had contaminated the very air around her, the mask began to crack when an old man trimming his rose bushes paused, staring through his iron fence with wary suspicion as if Serena were a threat instead of a daughter coming home. She knew she had stepped onto foreign ground in her homeland. She passed a marble welcome sign etched with Red Maple Grove, a community of tradition and pride. In the fading light, tradition and pride mocked her, a reminder that tradition here was never meant for everyone. Tradition, in their eyes, meant preserving a neighborhood of white face, old values, and simmering fears of anyone who didn't fit their mold. Serena pulled her cap lower, not to hide, but to shield her steely gaze from clashing too directly with the averted eyes on porches and behind curtained windows. Each step she took left whispers in her wake, like a cold wind hissing through leaves. She caught fragments. Who let her in here? I thought they had stricter screening in this neighborhood. That kind always brings trouble sooner or later. These whispers didn't need to be loud to reveal the truth. Serena understood. Racism here wasn't just action. It was embedded in thought, in the air they breathed. Many black people, and most white ones, had been convinced that if a black person was treated unfairly, it was somehow their fault, for not fitting in properly, for not knowing their place. In silence, Serena made a vow. She would not allow that lie to bury her family's dignity. Their presence in Red Maple Grove was not an intrusion. It was a rightful claim. No permission needed. She stopped before her parents' house, a modest, white-painted home with worn wooden steps, standing out amid the gleaming mansions wrapped like candy in the glossy paper. The American flag still flew on the porch. Walter Brooks was already waiting on the steps. He looked older than Serena remembered. As he came down to greet her, his shoulders seemed to bow under an invisible weight, but his eyes, though tired, lit up when he saw his daughter. One short hug, no words needed, was enough for Serena to feel the storm of emotions her parents had carried alone. Inside, the house was still neatly kept, just as it had been when Serena was a child. But a thick, heavy silence filled the space, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Her mother, Darlene Brooks, smiled to welcome her, but deep lines of worry carved themselves into her face. On the dining table, stacked neatly, were the HOA violation notices, each one a small but brutal proof of the hostility they faced daily. Serena sat down, running her fingers lightly over the papers amuse, reading the coldly printed excuses. Each sheet was a pretense. Each line was a veiled insult wrapped in the language of community standards. Outside the window, Red Maple Grove glowed under the sunset, luxury cars gliding down flawless asphalt roads. But Serena knew that gloss was thin and fragile. Beneath it lay invisible fear of difference, silent rejection, a sweet but deadly racism that didn't need slurs or overt violence, only enough turned-away glances, enough whispered condemnations to suffocate. Serena sat there, quietly folding each violation notice into a small, neat stack. She didn't feel the explosive anger of her younger years. She didn't feel defeated either. What rose in her now was a quiet, hardened resolve, cold and certain like forged steel. Night fell, and Red Maple Grove bathed in the dim glow of street lamps and the faint strains of patriotic songs from someone's outdoor speakers. But for Serena Brooks, this night was no longer peaceful. Tonight, she knew without doubt, this was no sanctuary. This was a battlefield, and this time, the battle began right at her own front porch. The heavy heat of the late afternoon hadn't yet broken when a gleaming white Lexus pulled into the narrow driveway leading to the Brooks home. A clipboard clutched in one hand, her bleached blonde hair puffed up like a fake crown. Karen Mitchell, the self-appointed HOA president of Red Maple Grove, stepped out of the car. Her high heels struck the pavement with a dry, sharp rhythm as if each step declared, "I'm here to command, not negotiate." Serena stood on the porch, arms crossed, her gaze tracking every stiff movement. Karen adjusted her dress, pursed her lips into a carefully calibrated smile, the kind worn by people who mastered the art of delivering cruelty wrapped in politeness. Walter Brooks had barely made it outside when he caught sight of that smile, and by force of lifelong habit, he tried to pull his lips into a courteous grin. But Serena knew. Behind his back, her father was clenching his fists to stop himself from trembling. "Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks," Karen chirped, her voice shrill as she marched over with her clipboard tucked under her arm like a scepter of authority. "I'm here to gently remind you about a few community guidelines. Hope I'm not intruding." Serena slowly stepped down from the porch to stand beside her father. She said nothing, simply watched, her eyes sharp as a hidden blade behind a calm exterior. Karen wasted no time, her syrupy voice listing infractions. The doormat, not matching the HOA-approved color palette, the black trim added to the windows creating an aggressive impression, the outdoor furniture being too ornate, disrupting the visual harmony of the neighborhood. Every word felt like a deliberate scratch, as if Serena and her family were a blemish to be scrubbed out of the neighborhood's polished facade. And of course, Karen lowered her voice, her eyes sweeping over Serena like tallying up a defective product. "We always appreciate diversity. We just hope everyone maintains the kind of harmony this community expects." The unfinished sentence didn't need to spell out the word differently, but Serena heard it clearly, a blade twisting into her pride. She felt her father's hand tremble beside her, his jaw twitching as he fought to control the rise in anger. Walter opened his mouth about to say something, but Serena gently placed a hand on his arm, signaling him to hold back. Her eyes, calm and razor-sharp, locked onto Karen like a hawk eyeing prey. She smiled, a smile polite enough to avoid reproach, but cold enough to strip away pretense. "Oh, I see," Serena said, her voice soft but tempered like cold steel. "The doormat must match the approved palette, the window trim must project submission, and even the way we sit and drink tea on our porch needs your approval." Karen hesitated, the smile faltering for a split second before she recovered her polished facade. "I'm sure you understand. At Red Maple Grove, we have certain standards." Serena cut her off, her voice not loud but carrying an immovable weight. "What standards are those, Mrs. Mitchell? Lawn height standards or skin color standards?" The air froze instantly. Walter Brooks' eyes widened. He hadn't expected such a direct blow from his daughter, but there was no hiding the flicker of pride in his gaze. Karen stiffened. Her manicured hand tightened around the clipboard, crimson nails digging into the cardboard. A flush crept up her neck, and over her cheeks. Serena stood firm, her dark eyes never leaving Karen's face, dissecting every thread of pretense woven into her designer dress. We simply enforce community regulations fairly," Karen stammered, the first cracks in her confidence showing. "Good," Serena said, smiling as she slowly pulled a small phone from her pocket and placed it on the porch railing, its screen blinking with an active recording app. "Because I appreciate fairness, too." Karen froze, staring at the device as if it had transformed into a weapon. No more words were needed. Serena had made it clear. Every word, every gesture today would be recorded, preserved as living evidence against any discrimination wrapped in the cloak of regulations. In a final, desperate attempt to salvage dignity, Karen adjusted her dress, forced a strained smile, muttered something unintelligible, and turned sharply on her heels. Her high-heeled footsteps pounded the pavement, quick and angry. Walter exhaled. A long breath of stone finally lifted from his chest. He turned to his daughter, his eyes still worried, but now filled with quiet admiration. Serena picked up the phone, gently ending the recording, and smiled at him. "Don't worry, Dad," she said, her voice soft but steady. "In this battle, we won't be the ones bowing our heads." Behind them, Red Maple Grove still wore its sweet artificial smile. But Serena knew better. Beneath the surface, the undercurrents of injustice and prejudice had already begun to crack, and she would be the one to expose every fracture, armed with intelligence, calm, and a pride no one could steal. That afternoon, just a few hours after Karen Mitchell's courtesy visit, Red Maple Grove fell into a strange, uneasy silence. No more children's laughter on the lawns, no distant barking of dogs. The polished SUVs remained parked silently in driveways, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting for something worse to come. And then it did. A white patrol car. No city emblem, just a simple duct-taped label reading HOA Enforcement, crawled slowly along the pristine roads. Behind the wheel was a man Serena had never met, but had heard plenty about. Matt Fuller, Karen's boyfriend, a part-time cop who saw himself as the full-time guardian of the neighborhood's order. A small badge gleamed beneath his light blue shirt, like a talisman permitting him to turn authority into a whip. The vehicle crept to a stop right in front of the Brooks house. Matt Fuller stepped out, hands on hips, the last rays of sun glinting off his mirrored sunglasses. He wore his uniform, not to ensure safety, but as armor for blatant intimidation. Serena sat on the porch, holding a lukewarm cup of coffee, her eyes tracking his every move. As Matt approached, she set the cup down and rose slowly, like a warrior recognizing a new battlefield. Matt let his gaze sweep over Serena from head to toe, a deliberate, insolent stare. Then, with a voice dripping with disdain and casual cruelty, he sneered, "Girl, you need to learn some manners. Not ma'am, not miss, no courtesy due to an adult woman. Just a girl, like she was a stray black child who needed correction." Each word oozed from his mouth like acid, burning away the thin air between them. Serena didn't react immediately. She simply stood there, arms loose at her sides, her face carved from stone. Inside her, memories of being called that word in far-off battle zones surged, places where civilians only saw her skin before they saw her humanity. But this wasn't Baghdad. This wasn't Kabul. This was Red Maple Grove. This was her home. And here, she would have to fight for the basic dignity that should have been hers by right, against those entrusted with defending justice. Matt lifted his clipboard, a fresh one, boldly stamped with the HOA logo, and began fake scribbling notes, his eyes scanning every minor detail of the Brooks home. He spoke loudly enough for the neighbors to hear, each statement like a whip cracking through the still air. No valid registration for the patio furniture. Porch light exceeds HOA brightness limits. flag height below community standard. His voice wasn't making announcements, it was making accusations, constructing a public indictment of the Brooks family as if their very existence was a crime. Every violation he barked was another lash meant to shame, to humiliate, to pressure them into bowing their heads for daring to exist in this space. The front door swung open. Walter Brooks stepped out, his face rigid, his eyes dark with fury. Too many times he had forced himself to swallow his pride, too many times telling himself to be agreeable for the sake of peace. But today, his blood boiled. He opened his mouth, ready to fire back. Serena laid a hand on his arm, squeezing lightly, her eyes never leaving Matt. She needed no words, just one small firm shake of her head, and Walter fell silent. Serena stepped forward, standing toe-to-toe with Matt Fuller, the embodiment of the crooked justice smothering Red Maple Grove, and crossed her arms. Her voice, low and sharp as a honed blade, cut the air. "Thanks for the reminders, Officer Fuller. I'll make sure to thoroughly review every detail, so you won't have to trouble yourself citing such serious offenses like mismatched doormats and porch lights that are too bright." Matt stiffened, his grip tightening around the clipboard. Serena wasn't finished. She tilted her head slightly, a cool, razor-edged smile curving her lips. "It's really inspiring to see our tax dollars at work, training officers so dedicated to measuring flag heights and inspecting window frames." Her voice emphasized dedicated, balancing praise and brutal mockery in equal measure. Matt's jaw clenched. Behind those mirrored lenses, a flicker of rage flared, but Serena stood firm, unshakable, like a stone pillar in a hurricane. "I also hope," Serena continued, her tone low but every word ringing clear, "that while you're fulfilling such noble duties, you remember, a badge isn't a license to intimidate. It's a promise to protect justice for everyone, regardless of skin color or street address." Matt froze for a moment. Maybe he hadn't expected calm defiance. Maybe he was used to bowed heads and quick apologies. But Serena didn't retreat. She remained there, a dark statue carved against the pristine, false whiteness of Red Maple Grove. He muttered something under his breath, scrawled a few more lines on his clipboard, and turned back toward his patrol car. The engine revved, growling with defiance as he rolled away, leaving behind a smear of dust in the golden light. Serena stood motionless on the steps, watching until the car disappeared. She could feel her father's heavy breathing behind her, could sense the furtive glances peeking from behind curtained windows, but she also knew something else with piercing clarity. The battle was no longer theoretical. It had begun, and it would not be easy. Not because of the fines, not because of the stairs, but because power that should have been a shield, was now a weapon in the hands of men like Matt. Serena stepped back into the house, each stride planting deeper into her soul an unbreakable vow. They may wear badges, they may hold laws in their hands, but they will not choke the life out of her family. Not today, not ever. Night fell over Red Maple Grove like a thick, heavy blanket, smothering the white-painted rooftops, the flawlessly trimmed lawns, and the cold whispers slipping through every window crack. Serena Brooks sat silently on the wooden porch steps, her gaze drifting toward the pale streetlights casting dappled patches of light on the stone pathway, like old wounds that never healed. In the darkness, her mind replayed the encounters of the day. Karen, with her mocking smile smeared behind red lipstick, and Matt, flashing his badge like a shield for the contempt he barely bothered to hide. They didn't need to scream knocker or spray hateful graffiti across her door. Their disdain dripped slowly, insidiously, like acid, sinking into the marrow of existence. Serena clenched her jaw. A part of her, the part that had crossed minefields and dodged gunfire, wanted to lash out, to rip apart the mask they wore, to scream until the entire neighborhood was forced to hear the injustice they were complicit in. But she knew better. Not here. Not in Red Maple Grove, where silence, bylaws, and carefully curated smiles had long been sharpened into weapons. Serena thought back to what she once believed, that serving her country, donning the uniform, being willing to give her life in places few dared venture, would earn her and her family respect, equality, and the basic rights every American citizen was promised. But upon returning home, what greeted her wasn't gratitude. It was wary glances, meaningless violation notices, half smiles peeking from behind draped curtains. The naked truth stood before her. In America, sometimes anti-racism wasn't fought with real remedies, but by pretending racism didn't exist. As long as no law mentioned race outright, as long as regulations were framed as neutral, injustice could thrive, polished and sanctioned under the veneer of equal opportunity. She exhaled, remembering the morning news shows where a few successful black individuals were paraded like shining proof that racism was dead. But Serena knew better. A few names held aloft couldn't erase the millions of opportunities silently stolen, the millions of lives quietly crushed in broken neighborhoods, failing schools, and empty promises. She closed her eyes, letting the weariness slip over her like a cold night breeze crawling across an empty field. Serena understood. No one was going to hand her family a rightful place here. No eyes would suddenly soften with guilt. No doors would magically open because their neighbors realized the wrongs they had done. They wouldn't feel shame. They wouldn't change. No matter how many medals she had, no matter how much sacrifice she could prove, the burden would remain squarely on her shoulders. If Serena wanted justice, she couldn't wait for grace. The night grew heavier, but inside her a plan was beginning to sharpen, clear, cold, and gleaming like a blade freshly honed under a silver moon. This victory wouldn't come from loud confrontation, the kind they would twist into a portrait of troublemaking. It would come from evidence they couldn't deny, procedures so precise that even if they tried to wriggle free, they would find themselves trapped by the very rules they once used to oppress others. Serena wouldn't let herself fall into the trap Karen and Matt had set. She would turn their quiet surveillance into a vice that squeezed their ambitions until they crumbled, a trap woven from the very laws they had relied on to mask their prejudice. And very soon, Karen, Matt, and all the eyes lurking behind curtains would have no choice but to face an undeniable truth. Serena Brooks was never prey in their game. She would be the one in control. And this time, when the final curtain fell, the victory would no longer belong to those who hid their bigotry behind hollow laws. It would belong to truth, to dignity, and justice. That morning, before the sun had fully dried the thin layer of dew on Red Maple Grove's flawless lawns, Serena Brooks stood on her porch, her hand gripping the cold steel flagpole. No fanfare, no grand declarations. She quietly hoisted a Black Lives Matter flag beside the weathered American flag that had long faded under the harsh sun. The early breeze stirred the two banners, weaving them together in the sky like two opposing souls, one a broken promise of freedom, the other a reminder that freedom had never reached everyone. Serena tightened the knots, lifted her gaze, and found no room left for fear. To outsiders, it might have seemed a small personal statement, but to her, it was a test of courage, a test she knew she had to pass not just for herself, but for her parents, for every black soul who quietly endured in places like this, and for those whose names would never be remembered. She stepped back, watching the black flag ripple in the morning sun, a strange mixture of peace and a tightness in her chest swelling inside her. A quiet but firm declaration. This is my home. This is my country too. But before Serena could turn to go inside, Karen Mitchell appeared across the street like an unwelcome shadow. Arms crossed over her chest, Karen's cold eyes swept across the new flag and her lips curled into a thin, contemptuous smile. Serena didn't bother responding. She understood. People like Karen didn't need to scream slogans. Their existence was already a proclamation. Serena only clenched her hands behind her back, refusing to let her rising emotions leak into careless movements. Later that afternoon, returning from the backyard, Serena found a neatly folded white notice tucked into the front door. Her brow furrowed as she read the printed words. HOA violation notice. Fine. $500 for inciting community division. She reread the line slowly, as if digesting a verdict against her dignity. The words were short, clinical, but behind them lay the crushing weight of a system long perfected at disguising bigotry beneath beautiful terms like harmony and order. Serena squeezed the notice lightly in her hand, her eyes lifting across the street. As if on cue, Karen Mitchell still stood beneath the blinding white porch of her pristine house, her fingers interlaced, her smile widening in quiet triumph. No words were necessary, both of them understood the message. To Karen, Red Maple Grove wasn't a neighborhood, it was a fortress, and anyone who didn't fit the image she worshipped would be driven out, through economic penalties or the slow, invisible choke of psychological warfare. Serena folded the notice into quarters, tucked it into her pocket, and returned to the porch. She looked up at the Black Lives Matter flag flying proudly in the breeze. A cold rage rippled down her spine, but it wasn't wild fury. It was a sharpened, deliberate anger, strong and tempered like forged steel. The total fines the Brooks family had accumulated over the past year had reached staggering sums. Each petty citation, from hose colors to grass blade lengths, piled atop each other, not to correct anything, but to suffocate their existence beneath an invisible mountain of debt. But Serena wasn't someone who bowed under fines or disdainful stares. She wasn't born to bend her head. She hadn't survived foreign battlefields just to die a slow, quiet death under the indifferent gaze of people who had never known true loss. That very night, as Red Maple Grove slept beneath its facade of peace, Serena fired up her laptop, the cold blue light illuminating her set jaw. File after file opened. Photographs of violation notices, images of her flags, video clips capturing HOA officials ignoring blatant infractions by white residents. Each photo, each clip, was another arrow she meticulously honed for the coming battle. She gathered evidence like a jeweler assembling precious stones, fitting each small piece into a crown that no one could deny. Every drop of rain, every neighbor's scowl at the sight of her flag, every slamming door behind her back, Serena turned them all into assets. Outside the window, Matt Fuller's patrol car crawled past once more, a specter in the dark. Serena watched it go, her eyes devoid of anger or fear now, only the cold, calm focus of a hunter who had already dug the trap, waiting for the prey to step in. Very soon, Serena Brooks would show them no amount of whitewashed paint could forever hide the rot beneath. And when the truth finally broke free, when those who once sneered at her hung their heads in shame, Serena would still be standing, not shouting, not seeking revenge, but simply smiling as the Black Lives Matter flag soared proud and defiant over Red Maple Grove. No one would force her to kneel. No one would extinguish the pride that had been etched into her blood from the very beginning. And refusing to let hatred darken the small joys of everyday life, Walter Brooks stepped out onto the porch with a simple oak bird feeder he had crafted himself from leftover wood. Walter had loved nature his entire life, and since retirement, his greatest pleasure was watching the little sparrows and robins flutter and sing around the yard. Sitting in his rocking chair, listening to the soft beat of wings in the wind, was his quiet definition of peace. So when Serena suggested he hang the new feeder, he agreed immediately. A small, natural-colored feeder, secured firmly to the old oak tree in their front yard, It looked so innocent, so pure, it seemed unimaginable anyone could find fault. But Red Maple Grove was not a place for innocence. Less than 2 hours after Walter hung the bird feeder, the familiar figure of Karen Mitchell appeared once again, her steps brisk, her clipboard tucked under her arm like a drawn weapon ready to strike down any act of difference. She stood on the sidewalk, craning her neck to glare up at the small wooden feeder as if it were a grave threat to the neighborhood. After a moment, Karen pulled out a pen and began scribbling furiously onto yet another violation notice. Serena stepped outside, silent, simply watching. She knew the performance all too well. 15 minutes later, Serena heard the familiar low rumble of an engine outside. Matt Fuller's white SUV, no sirens, but carrying a far more insidious threat, slithered down the street and parked just beyond their driveway, a predator catching the scent of blood. Matt stepped out, adjusted the belt holding his badge, and swaggered over to the old oak tree. He pointed sharply at the bird feeder, his chin jutting toward Walter and Serena, his voice steady but heavy with contempt. Seems like some people around here don't understand what community standards mean. Each word was a stone, cold and heavy, hurled directly into their faces. He didn't need to say black people out loud. He only had to linger on some people with just enough malice for everyone to hear the unspoken accusation. Serena stood to the side, hands loose at her sides, a low fire smoldering inside her. But she didn't rush forward. She didn't let anger lead her. Instead, she calmly pulled a small phone from her jacket pocket and pressed a button. A soft beep sounded. The recording had begun. Every pointed finger, every sneering remark from Matt, every smug glance from Karen in the distance was captured, cool and meticulous, like a hunter laying down each piece of a trap. Matt circled the yard, pretending to conduct an inspection, eyeing the feeder as if it were a biohazard. Then, with a voice dripping superiority, he declared, "Unauthorized attraction of wildlife, violation of Section 6.8b, potential public health risk to other residents." Serena felt her lips tremble with anger, but her voice remained cold and precise. Section 6.8b requires actual evidence of a safety threat. Officer Fuller, do you have any evidence that this bird feeder poses a danger? Matt faltered for a beat, not expecting such a sharp, measured reply. He muttered something incoherent and stomped back to his car, defeated but unwilling to admit it. The latest violation notice appeared in the Brooks mailbox within hours. Fine. $300 for unauthorized attraction of wildlife. From across the street, Karen Mitchell smiled again, that same self-satisfied smirk of someone who believed the entire system bent to her will. And Serena felt it, not the sting of shame, but the righteous fury of knowing the truth. To Karen and Matt, anything the Brooks family did could be twisted into a weapon. A simple bird feeder became a crime because it dared to exist in front of a black family's home among a sea of white. A tiny symbol of life and joy was perverted into noncompliance, into a threat to order. And people like Karen and Matt, they didn't need to shout slurs. They didn't need to vandalize. They simply built a network of selective rules and covert punishments, wrapping injustice in the cold silk of community standards. But this time, Serena Brooks was ready. She stored the video, along with every scrap of evidence, the whispered insults, the selective enforcement, the racism disguised as bureaucracy. She knew the battle was no longer unfolding day by day. It was moving inch by inch, breath by breath. And every petty action they took today, every gloating smile they failed to hide, would become the very stones paving the road to their downfall. Serena Brooks would not retreat. She wasn't born to be a background character in someone else's kingdom. And this time it wouldn't just be Red Maple Grove that bore witness, It would be the entire city, the entire country, hearing the story of a black woman who refused to kneel. One small bird feeder, one ordinary family, one seemingly untouchable community. Very soon, nothing would ever be the same again. That night, after completing the backups of the videos capturing Matt Fuller pointing at the bird feeder, Serena Brooks decided to check the security camera system around the house once again. Not because of any specific threat, just a hunch, that quiet instinct she had learned to trust during her years moving through battlefields. She switched on the monitor. The cameras swept slowly. The front yard, the backyard, the driveway, the narrow side alley. At first, everything looked normal. The same tightly trimmed lawns, the neatly parked cars, the rows of soft yellow streetlights stretching along the sidewalks. But then her eyes caught something. A tiny, blinking light across the street, mounted on the eaves of house number 42, just 3 doors down. Serena narrowed her eyes and zoomed in. Her chest tightened. It was a security camera, one not belonging to her, angled deliberately to point directly at the Brooks front porch. She switched to another feed. Another camera, this time on the side wall of house number 38, and another, hidden atop a seemingly abandoned street lamp, aimed straight at the rear entryway to their backyard. Serena froze, her fingers whitening around the armrests of the chair. It wasn't just one. It wasn't just one neighbor. A small network, carefully placed, quietly surrounding her family in an invisible noose. A cold wave crept up Serena's spine. She shot to her feet and strode onto the porch, scanning the neighborhood, and for the first time since coming home to Red Maple Grove, she truly felt surrounded, not by guns or armored vehicles or visible enemies, but by hidden eyes behind tightly drawn curtains, by silent lenses capturing every move, every glance, every breath. Serena leaned against a porch column, her mind a whirl. She had steeled herself to confront Karen Mitchell, a visible, nameable enemy. But she hadn't expected the real enemy to be an invisible web, woven from silent complicity, ingrained prejudice, and the desperate fear of losing the purity of Red Maple Grove. Not just Karen, she thought quietly, her eyes scanning the rooftops glittering under the streetlights. I'm fighting a mindset, a system embedded into every brick and every window pane of this place. She drew in a long, steadying breath, but inside a storm was beginning to form. The feeling of being made a target, a pariah, to be watched, recorded, marked. It didn't make her afraid. It made her burn with nameless anger. Serena stepped down onto the lawn, her boots sinking into the damp, dew-soaked grass. She walked slowly, looking up at each house in turn. And the longer she looked, the clearer the signs became. Cameras disguised in fake potted plants, lenses peeking from behind second-story curtains. It wasn't random. It wasn't for community safety like they would claim. It was a system of control not designed to protect, but to isolate, to erase anyone who didn't fit their manufactured ideal. And in their eyes, Serena Brooks, a black woman flying a Black Lives Matter flag, a woman who dared to lift her head and meet their gaze, was the ultimate threat. She walked the narrow path, each step hammering home the realization that the isolation wasn't just coming from Karen or Matt. It was coming from the silent neighbors, too, the ones she had once thought were simply uninvolved. A dull ache gripped Serena's chest, not fear, but awakening. What she was fighting wasn't just a woman with a clipboard or an arrogant part-time cop. She was facing a sickness that had seeped deep into the foundations of America itself, a place where promises of freedom and equality had always been delivered selectively, only to those who fit in. Serena stopped under the old oak tree, gazing up. The Black Lives Matter flag still fluttered in the night breeze, small and solitary among the rows of American flags dotting the pristine neighborhood. But to Serena, it wasn't just a flag. It was a scratch across the perfect painting Red Maple Grove tried so desperately to maintain, a scratch she vowed would never be wiped away. She clenched her fists, feeling the steady pulse of blood pounding under her skin, a rhythm forged through war, through loss, through the silent battles every person of color had fought across generations. They wanted her to be afraid. They wanted her to lower the flag, to shrink back, to vanish. But Serena Brooks had come home, and she had not come to disappear. She had come to prove that even amid a cold surveillance network, even within walls built from prejudice, one person, if they stood firm, if they refused to bend, could crack an entire fortress. She smiled, a light but unyielding smile, and in her heart she knew this battle had only just begun. Day after day passed in Red Maple Grove, and every morning when Serena Brooks woke up, she felt more and more like a prisoner, not one bound by stone walls, but by invisible barriers made of prying eyes and silent cameras lurking everywhere. Her tactical instincts, the ones that had saved her countless times on dangerous military missions, had now become her sharpest weapon at home, allowing her to see the truth plainly. Her family was being watched, every breath, every movement subjected to suffocating scrutiny. When she took Max, her loyal old dog, out for walks, the eyes from behind window curtains felt like silent gun barrels trained on her. With every step she took, a curtain would flutter closed. When Max scratched his ear, somewhere nearby came the faint, sinister click of a hidden camera snapping photos. Once, when Max barked at a squirrel, Serena spotted Matt Fuller at the corner of the street, his cold stare fixed on her, phone raised like a weapon to capture evidence of disturbance. Even the simplest actions, like her mother, Gloria Brooks, watering the rose bushes, became occasions for surveillance. Serena would stand in the kitchen, watching neighbors from 2 or 3 houses over leaning out to fix their eyes on the harmless stream of water. One even raised a phone to record the scene, as if documenting a crime in progress. Serena knew one droplet overflowing from the flower bed could easily become an accusation of common area flooding under Section 7.4b, one of Karen Mitchell's favorite regulations to wield. Every time her father, Walter, went to retrieve the mail, he too faced the same silent judgment. The mailbox itself had become a boundary, one step beyond it, one casual move, and they would pounce with another twisted rule citation. Serena realized her family was no longer living in Red Maple Grove like ordinary citizens. They were living as prisoners, caged not by bars but by a cold network of surveillance knitted tightly, gently, with fear and prejudice. She could feel the invisible trenches closing in. Every time she stepped out, turned on the garden hose, or unlatched Max's leash, it was like walking across a minefield, where even the smallest misstep could be twisted into a public disturbance. She fought to stay calm, fought to live as though the hundreds of watching eyes didn't exist, but reality pressed in like a cold metallic taste on every breath. One late afternoon, while Serena was adjusting a flower pot on the porch, she heard a whispering float from the neighboring house. The words weren't clear, but the tone cut sharper than any blade. That family, they're not like us. Wonder when HOA's going to deal with that black flag. Best if they just moved out, keep the neighborhood peaceful. Serena pressed a new rose into the soil, her hand clenching so tightly her knuckles went white. She didn't turn around. She didn't answer. She was long used to fighting battles with silence as hard as stone. As night fell, Red Maple Grove once again cloaked itself in its false blanket of peace. Porch lights flicked on, glass windows sealed tight, manicured lawns stretched flawlessly across the darkened streets like a perfect painting. But Serena knew, behind every lit window, eyes were watching, waiting for an excuse, for any abnormal action to justify another cold legal judgment. That night, Serena sat by the window, absent-mindedly stroking Max's golden fur, her gaze tracing each porch light blinking out one by one as the night deepened. There were no sirens, no pounding on the door, no noisy raids like the war zones she once knew, only a silent, stifling pressure, like fine dust filling her lungs, making it harder and harder to breathe. And in that thick silence, Serena understood. The battle she was fighting wasn't a clash of fists or flags. It was a slow, corrosive war against the soul, where each day eroded a little more patience, stole a little more faith, gnawed away at the simple human right of just existing without having to constantly prove you deserve it. It wasn't a loud war with bullets and victory banners. It was a battlefield of suffocation, where enemies hid behind smiles and the wounds bled invisibly, drop by drop, like water slowly wearing away stone. But Serena Brooks was never someone to let erosion strip away her spirit. She hadn't survived blood-soaked fields and bombed-out cities only to be imprisoned behind floral hedges and pretty lies. She hadn't come home to die quietly beneath the suffocating silence of a model community. The invisible trenches they dug around her family, with fines, with glances, with whispered judgments, would now become the very paths through which Serena would strike back. The siege had been laid, but this time it wouldn't be their traps that decided the outcome. It would be Serena Brooks who laid the mines under their every smug, complacent step. That morning, the sky over Red Maple Grove was a heavy, oppressive gray, the thick clouds hanging like stone slabs above the rooftops. The damp air carried the earthy scent of wild grass along the sidewalks, and it weighed down on Serena Brooks's heart even further. She tightened her shirt, pulled her hair back neatly, her reflection in the mirror showing a face hardened without a single crack. Today, she would bring the evidence she had painstakingly gathered, the videos, the photos, the time-stamped notes, to the county office. She had spent countless sleepless nights cross-referencing laws, studying every clause related to illegal surveillance directed at private property without consent. Everything was ready. She did not expect an easy victory, but she believed in the existence of the law. At least, she needed to see it for herself. The county office sat at the center of town, a low gray brick building with small windows and worn waiting benches polished smooth by time. Serena stepped inside, her file clutched tightly, her boots tapping a steady rhythm across the cold tile floor. Every glance in the waiting room seemed to slide across her, some curious, some wary, and some cold and blank as stone. But she was used to walking under such stares. She squared her shoulders and approached the front desk, her voice clear. "I would like to file an official complaint regarding the unauthorized installation and use of surveillance equipment in the Red Maple Grove residential area." The woman at the desk, a middle-aged white woman with neatly pinned brown hair, lifted her eyes to Serena, her stare so cold it seemed to lower the room's temperature by several degrees. She motioned for Serena to wait and disappeared into the back, leaving her alone facing a television screen airing mindless local news. 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes. With each passing minute, the air in the room grew thicker. People who arrived after her were called in one by one. Serena sat there, back straight, gaze unwavering. Finally, a man in a light gray suit emerged, carrying a thin folder in his hands, his expression detached, his eyes avoiding direct contact with Serena's. "I'm sorry, Miss Brooks," he began, his voice monotonous, as if reading from a prepared script. "After reviewing your documents and evidence, we find insufficient grounds to initiate an official investigation." Serena sat still, silent, only her hands clenched into tight fists on her knees, the knuckles paling with pressure. "The cameras in question," the man continued, "could be considered part of general neighborhood security efforts. Unless there is concrete evidence that they were installed with the intent to deliberately violate your privacy, we cannot intervene." His words were smooth, each one wrapped in velvet, but sharp as a blade. And within every word, Serena recognized a truth she had already suspected. Karen Mitchell had not only built her network of control within the neighborhood, she had extended her reach far beyond, to the very halls of power that were supposed to stand for justice. Serena rose, gathering her file, her movements crisp and deliberate, like a soldier locking and loading before battle. No protests, no pleas. Just a long, heavy silence blanketing the entire room like a leaden shroud. She turned and walked out. As the glass door swung shut behind her, no one looked up. No one asked if she was all right. No one cared. Outside, the sky was a solid sheet of gray, swallowing the light of day. Serena drew a deep breath, tasting the wet asphalt and the musty brush along the sidewalks, the bitter scent of a small town hiding its rot behind bright slogans. She walked down the pavement, each step heavy but steady. With every step, another layer of illusion peeled away from her mind. Red Maple Grove was never just a neighborhood, and this fight had never been about bird feeders or garden hoses. It was a fight for the right to exist, the right to be equal, the right to look another person in the eye without needing anyone's permission. Serena paused at the corner, looking up at the gray expanse above. A cold wind gusted by, scattering brittle yellow leaves across the street. In that moment, she felt neither sorrow nor rage, only clarity. Cold, sharp clarity like a freshly honed blade. "If the law has been blinded," Serena whispered, her voice steady and certain, "then I'll teach it how to see." She turned back, her eyes glowing with a new light, the light of someone no longer shackled by expectation or fear. This defeat was only a chapter in a much longer song she was writing, a necessary chapter to etch into her soul the truth that justice, freedom, and dignity were never handed out freely. They had to be fought for, with everything a person could offer. Serena tightened her grip on the file in her hand, and for the first time in days she laughed, a dry iron laugh full of unshakable resolve. Red Maple Grove had gotten used to burying dissent under paperwork and silence, but they had never faced Serena Brooks, and soon they would learn. Some people, when cornered, don't break, they become sharper. Night fell over Red Maple Grove like a heavy, oppressive blanket. Porch lights flickered on here and there, casting weak yellow glows onto the immaculate eaves and walls layered with unwritten rules. Serena Brooks sat in her rocking chair on the porch, a cup of cold coffee cradled in her hands, her eyes fixed on the long shadows stretching across the walkway. Another day passed. Another day without progress. Another day filled with averted glances, silent cameras, and whispers behind closed doors. In that thick, stifling air, a knock echoed. 3 quick taps, urgent but careful, as if the visitor was wrestling their fear. Serena set the cup down and rose slowly. Her hand brushed the phone in her pocket, an ingrained habit from her years in the war zone. Through the small window pane, she saw the figure of an older man, thin, wearing a faded baseball cap and a weathered khaki jacket. Serena cracked the door open just enough for their eyes to meet. The man looked up, his pale brown eyes flickering with a mixture of anxiety and determination. "Sorry to bother you," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "I'm Leon Parker, from number 47. Serena nodded slightly. She knew Mr. Parker, a retired engineer, an Asian-American man who lived as quietly as a shadow in this neighborhood. Since she returned, he had only acknowledged her once with a discreet nod. Parker glanced around anxiously, then slipped inside in a quick, furtive motion, as if even a second's hesitation could drag him into the open. Once the door shut behind him, he pulled a small USB drive from his jacket and placed it in Serena's palm. "I can't show my face, not yet," he whispered, voice thick with tension. "But you need to have this." Serena looked down at the small device, her brows furrowing. "What is it?" she asked. Mr. Parker leaned closer, lowering his voice even more, as if the very walls had ears. A recording from last week's HOA meeting. I had a recorder hidden in my cap. Serena's eyes widened slightly in surprise. Why? She asked. A bitter smile crossed the old man's face, not one of humor, but of long-endured resignation. Because I've seen this happen before, he murmured, a confession more than an explanation. They find ways to push out anyone who doesn't fit. This time it's you. Before, it was the Singh family. Before that, others. He didn't have to finish. Serena understood. A complicated wave of emotions surged inside her. Gratitude tinged with sadness. Part of her wanted to ask why he hadn't stood up sooner, but part of her knew. In a world like this, sometimes survival itself was an act of silent rebellion. Mr. Parker squeezed her hand lightly, his grip thin but strong. "We're scared," he said, his voice trembling. "But if you need us, we won't stay silent anymore." His words broke the sound through the suffocating stillness that had surrounded Serena for days. A small crack, but the beginning of something bigger. Serena nodded, her hand closing firmly around the USB drive, feeling its weight grow heavy with promise. "Thank you, Mr. Parker," she said, her voice low but steady. "I won't let you regret this, Mr." Parker gave her a weary smile, and in his eyes, Serena caught a flicker of something rare. Hope, faint but persistent, like a porch light cutting through a winter night. He slipped out the door and disappeared into the darkness like a silent ghost. Only Serena remained, standing under the dim hallway light, her fist tight around the USB, her heart pounding with a new urgency. She sat down at the table, plugged the device into her laptop, her hands slightly trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to uncover. The screen lit up. One audio file. Serena pressed play. Static crackled briefly, then Matt Fuller's voice filled the room, low, smug, dripping with disdain. "I told you, they don't get how this community works. Let people like that do whatever they want, and Red Maple Grove will turn into a ghetto in no time." A pause. The sound of someone snickering, the shuffling of papers. "We have to keep control from the start, before things get out of hand." Serena sat frozen, eyes closed, absorbing every word. No speculation, no blurry accusations, just the raw, unfiltered truth, naked and damning. The evidence she needed was now in her hands. Not blurry footage, not whispered suspicions, but the voice of the man orchestrating it all, captured in his own words. For the first time in many long days, Serena felt a beam of light pierce through the thick night that had cloaked Red Maple Grove. It wasn't bright, it wasn't overwhelming, but it was enough to kindle a fire inside her. Small, fierce, unquenchable. The battle ahead would still be long. The walls of silence still stood tall. The hidden eyes would continue watching her every move. But now, Serena Brooks had something the rulers of this place could not easily crush: the truth. And more importantly, she was no longer alone. Night settled over Red Maple Grove in a thin, misty veil, as if the entire neighborhood was trying to hide something beneath the cold air. Ever since Leon Parker appeared at her door, Serena Brooks knew the time had come. The time to shatter the silence that had suffocated this place for far too long. She sent out invitations cautiously, not by text or email that could be traced, but through whispered conversations. Small notes slipped hand to hand at the farmer's market or outside the post office. The first meeting would be held at her house after 9 p.m., when most of the prying eyes had drawn their curtains shut. As the clock ticked out the heavy beats of the hour, figures began to appear at the Brooks' front porch. They didn't arrive together. They didn't speak. They simply nodded once and slipped inside like silent warriors slipping into a trench. Leon Parker arrived first, followed by the Singh family. The Indian couple once fined 3 times for putting up Diwali lights too early. Then came Ellen Moreno, a single Latina mother. Dark circles under her eyes from sleepless nights spent battling endless child noise citations. Even the Nguyen couple, the young Vietnamese family who had just moved in, appeared hesitantly, their eyes flickering between fear and hope. Serena looked at each face in turn. The faces of those who had spent too long bowed under invisible chains, forced to live within rules sharpened into nooses. At that moment, she didn't just see victims. She saw warriors, small, persistent flames waiting to be fanned into something unstoppable. The Brooks living room, once humble with its worn sofa and hand-woven beige rug, now felt like a makeshift headquarters. Serena drew the curtains tightly, checked the hidden recording devices, and then finally spoke. "We all know why we're here," Serena said, her voice low and steady. "Not because we want to stir trouble, not because we don't respect the law, but because we've had enough." She paused, letting her gaze sweep the room. No one spoke, but heads nodded, heavy with memories of humiliation, exclusion, and the weight of never quite fitting into the pristine picture of civilization the HOA demanded. Serena opened her laptop. The screen glowed to life, displaying folders full of audio recordings, photographs, violation notices, and letters she and others had quietly collected over months. The soft click of the mouse echoed like a drumbeat, summoning a silent uprising. "I have evidence of Matt Fuller and Karen Mitchell violating the civil rights of residents," she said, playing the recording of Matt's venomous, contemptuous words. The room held its breath. Some covered their mouths. Some clenched their fists. Some, perhaps for the first time in many months, allowed their long-suppressed fury to surface, no longer struggling to tamp it down. Serena turned back, a fierce glint sparking in her eyes. "We are not alone," she said. "They wanted us to think we were alone. They sowed fear to divide us. But, in truth, it's our silence that gave them power. And now it's time to take it back." Ellen Moreno, the woman who had once kept her head bowed whenever passing HOA board members, lifted her chin, her eyes flashing with a newfound pride. The Singhs exchanged a look of solid agreement. Leon Parker, the man who had always quietly mowed his lawn at dawn to avoid scrutiny, pressed his lips together and nodded firmly. "We will share this evidence," Serena continued, her voice as steady as the concrete floor beneath their feet. "We will file a collective complaint. We will attend every HOA meeting. We will demand transparency. And if they threaten us, we'll have lawyers, the press, and civil rights organizations backing us." A new energy filled the room. Fear still lingered, etched into every wrinkle, every wary glance, but it was no longer a chain. It was fuel. Serena looked around and knew these were not weak people. These were warriors who had been forced into hibernation, and now, finally, they were waking up. "We've waited too long for someone to come and save us," she finished, her voice thick with urgency. "But the truth is, we are the ones we've been waiting for." Silence fell again, but this time it was a silence of agreement, of readiness. One hand lifted, Ellen Moreno, a nod, Leon Parker, another, the Singhs, then Nguyen's, then all of them. No speeches, no oaths, just a series of nods heavy with resolve. In that moment they formed a new alliance, a hidden community built not from fear or defeat, but from loss, resilience, and a stubborn belief that they deserved to live fully, freely, as human beings. Serena looked around, her heart swelling with a bittersweet warmth. For the first time since coming home to Red Maple Grove, she didn't feel alone. For the first time in the thickest darkness, she saw light, not from porch bulbs, but from the courageous hearts gathered in her living room. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but now every step she took would be matched by others walking beside her. The fight for justice, for dignity, for the right to exist with head held high was no longer Serena Brooks's fight alone. It was theirs. The Brooks home had turned into a makeshift command center in recent days. On the large wooden table in the living room, stacks of documents were meticulously organized. USB drives labeled and lined up, printed emails spread out and marked in red ink, each a slash across the false face of Red Maple Grove. Serena Brooks leaned over the table, methodically reviewing every detail, the desk lamp casting sharp highlights on her resolute features. She had spent countless sleepless nights poring over recordings, photographs of unjust inspections, emails from Karen Mitchell dripping with thinly veiled racial slurs, and unauthorized HOA expenditures pushed through without community approval. 48 pages, each one another nail hammered into the coffin of the silent regime Karen had built over the years. When Serena finally closed the file, the afternoon light was fading. The last golden beams pierced through thinning clouds, casting long fractured shadows across the front yard. She sat still for a moment, knowing deep in her bones that all the perseverance, all the pain she and others had endured was about to culminate in a moment of reckoning. But the quiet didn't last. The roar of a familiar engine broke the calm, followed by the shriek of tires grinding against the pavement. Serena rose, her expression hardening as she recognized Matt Fuller's white SUV screeching to a stop at her gate. Matt climbed out, hands on hips, his face twisted with unfiltered hatred. He wore his police uniform. The badge glinted in the dying light, but there was no justice in his eyes, only the rage of a man who was used to crushing others under the weight of his power. Serena opened her door, standing tall in the doorway, unflinching as a fortress. "Brooks," Matt bellowed, his voice echoing across the neighborhood. A few windows cracked open, shadows gathering behind curtains. "Take that flag down. It's against community standards, spreading division, inciting hostility." Serena didn't answer immediately. She stared straight into his eyes, letting the silence stretch between them, widening the crack in his hollow threats. "That flag," she finally said, her voice low but unwavering, "represents the lives of those who had their voices stolen. It represents the right to exist. It represents respect. It will not come down." Matt's jaw clenched. He stomped up the porch steps, the distance between them shrinking to mere feet, and then Serena saw it, his hand drifting toward his belt. Without warning, Matt drew his gun. The dark barrel pointed directly at her, the cold metal glinting under the last light of the sun. "People like you need to remember their place," he snarled, each word laced with foul contempt. Time froze. Max barked wildly from inside. A scream echoed from across the street. Windows that had been cracked open were now flung wide. Serena did not flinch. She did not step back. Instead, she calmly pulled a folded piece of paper from her jacket pocket. White paper, red seal, fresh signature. "Emergency protective order," she said, her voice cutting through the thick tension like a bell in a cathedral. "Matt Fuller, by the authority of the county court, you are prohibited from coming within 100 feet of me and my family." Matt froze, gun still raised, his face a dark storm of disbelief and barely contained fury. From the far end of the street, sirens wailed, sharp, urgent, and closing in fast. 2 patrol cars slid into view, their red and blue lights flaring against the dusky sky like sparks before a storm. Car doors swung open. 2 officers stepped out, this time not on Matt's side. One held a set of handcuffs. The other carried the warrant. "Matt Fuller," one of them called out, voice firm and clear. "You are under arrest for violating a county-issued protective order and for brandishing a weapon with intent to intimidate. You are hereby taken into custody." Matt roared, struggling, protesting, but it was useless. Within seconds, his arms were yanked behind his back, the metallic clink of handcuffs snapping shut, silencing his protests. Serena stood motionless, watching without a flicker of emotion. She knew this was only the beginning, but it was a beginning that could not be undone. Neighbors crept onto their porches, awning the sidewalks, those who once hid behind curtains now stepping into the open. Some filmed the arrest with their phones. Others whispered to each other, but everyone could see it. This time, justice had picked the right side. Matt was shoved into the back of the squad car, his white SUV left abandoned at the curb like a broken vessel stranded on dry land. Serena turned and quietly closed her door behind her. There was no triumph in her heart, no thirst for vengeance, only a heavy, resolute certainty. A part of Red Maple Grove's facade had crumbled, and this time there would be no place left for those who cloaked injustice in the trappings of law. On the table, the thick file still sat, 48 pages of evidence, a bomb waiting to be detonated. And Serena knew the battle was far from over. But with every brick that cracked, every curtain pulled back, she and those standing in the light were drawing closer to the day when Red Maple Grove would finally become a home for all. Outside, Red Maple Grove lay blanketed in a strange, heavy silence. No more whispering, no more sideways glances. The thick quiet hung like mist, a warning of a storm coiled just beyond the horizon. Serena reopened the 48-page file, combing through every piece of evidence. Every photograph, every audio recording, every email Karen Mitchell had carelessly left a trail of everything was in place. Just one more step, and the facade would collapse. Then, the soft chime of a new email notification rang out. Small, almost innocent. But in that moment, it sounded like fate itself, knocking at the door. Serena lifted her laptop, clicked open her inbox. A new message, bolded at the top. Emergency HOA communication. Sender, Karen Mitchell. A flicker of instinct stirred in Serena's chest. She glanced at her parents, then clicked it open. Her eyes skimmed through the lines, and within seconds, her eyebrows lifted, and the corner of her mouth twisted into a smile with no clear emotion. The email, meant for a select few on the HOA board, had been CC'd to every single resident of Red Maple Grove. Karen, in a fit of blind panic after Matt's arrest, had unleashed a tirade so raw, so unfiltered, that it exposed her for exactly who she was. If we let those people continue to challenge the rules, Red Maple Grove will turn into a garbage dump within one summer. We need to shut down this fake equal rights nonsense before it destroys our community. I'm not sorry for speaking plainly. This is about race, about preserving the order we built. Serena read each line carefully, the words landing heavy in the quiet room where even the ticking of the old clock seemed to pause. She leaned back, closed her eyes for a moment, letting it all seep into her bones. Walter set his teacup down, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from a deep, bittersweet ache. Evelyn sighed, but in her eyes there was a new light, a fragile but growing hope that all the silent suffering had not been in vain. Serena opened her eyes, now sharp as a blade newly honed. She turned the screen so her parents could read. No one spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. The truth had unveiled itself, raw, undeniable, and deafening. Across the street, in the gray-roofed house at the corner, Karen Mitchell was realizing the full weight of what she had done. She scrambled to her computer, hands shaken as she smashed the keys, trying to recall the email. But the system spat back a cold message. Recall failed. Message already opened. Fear hit her like a flood, sweeping away the brittle illusions of power she had clung to for so long. In her mind, flashes of scenes she once controlled. neighbors whispering in awe of her, HOA meetings where she sat atop a self-made throne dispensing standards like royal decrees, all shattered in an instant. She lurched from her chair, pounding the keyboard as if she could somehow erase the words that now echoed through every home in Red Maple Grove. But the more she panicked, the clearer her true face became. A small, mean-spirited figure incapable of facing the consequences of the hatred she had sown. Karen scrambled to call everyone she could, board members, old allies, even her lawyer, but was met only with cold silence, unanswered rings, and curt rejections. Karen Mitchell, the woman who once believed she could snuff out any dissent with a flick of her hand, was now unraveling, not from external attack but from her arrogance. She didn't lose because her enemies were too strong. She lost because her pride, her blindness, led her straight off a cliff. Her arrogance pushed her to the edge. Her cowardice hurled her into the abyss. Meanwhile, across the street in the warm, worn living room of the Brooks home, Serena Brooks sat back in her chair, listening to the strange silence that had descended over Red Maple Grove. No shouting, no threats. Only the crackling, unstoppable sound of truth exploding through every house, every corner, every heart that had been forced into silence for too long. Serena closed her eyes and let the moment soak into her like a healing rain after a long, brutal drought. In her mind, a thought rose, uncoached, born only from the bitter lessons carved deep into her soul. Sometimes, the oppressors don't need to be overthrown. Sometimes, if you give them enough time, they will destroy themselves. And this time, Red Maple Grove, the once pristine community built on rules disguised as civility, would be forced to stare, wide-eyed and unblinking, at the raw truth of the people they had entrusted for so long. The sky had darkened by the time Serena Brooks stepped into the Red Maple Grove Community Hall. The small room, usually reserved for dry debates over landscaping budgets and neighborhood events, was packed to the brim tonight. White, plastic chairs squeezed together, tense faces peeking out from behind thick glasses, hands clenched in nervous knots as they awaited the inevitable. At the front, the chairman's table stood as it always had, the same table where Karen Mitchell once presided, smiling smugly as she signed into effect the silent decrees that pushed undesirable families further and further to the margins. Tonight, Karen was there too, her face pale, the heavy makeup unable to hide the cracks of collapse etched deep into her features. She sat stiffly, chin jutted upward, but her eyes darted nervously, unable to hold the gaze of the crowd. Those same neighbors who once applauded her, now looking on with a mixture of anger, shame, and disbelief. Serena stepped forward, carrying the thick folder in her arms. Beside her stood Jason, the first white neighbor who dared to break the silence, and behind them, familiar faces: Leon Parker, the Singh family, Ellen Moreno, the Nguyens, all those who had once been the silent targets of Karen's reign. Serena faced the microphone. The harsh fluorescent lights overhead threw sharp lines across her determined face. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Serena spoke, her voice steady and clear, each word landing like a drumbeat. "I'm not here to argue," she began. "I'm here to present the truth." A soft click echoed as she opened her laptop and connected it to the large projector screen behind her. The first video played, Matt Fuller, in uniform, pointing at the Brooks home, his words dripping with arrogance, his tone unmistakably racist and threatening. The room held its breath. Some covered their mouths, others dropped their heads in shame. The second recording followed, audio from the HOA meeting, where Matt and Karen mocked the non-pure residents, scheming ways to create new rules to drive undesirable elements out. And then the emails, Karen's own words, sent to every inbox in Red Maple Grove, leaving no room for spin or excuse. The hall grew heavier with every revelation. No more side glances, no more forced smiles. Only a thick, suffocating silence. The silence of a court where everyone was both witness and, in some way, defendant for their complicity. Serena paused, letting the weight settle over the room before revealing the final slide, a detailed breakdown of HOA finances. Her finger pointed steadily at the cold, hard numbers. Unauthorized expenditures, self-approved management bonuses, manipulated voting results. Jason stepped forward, his voice cutting through the dense air. We have proof that Karen Mitchell fabricated and tampered with HOA election results for the past 3 years. She used our trust to build a system of division, discrimination, and corruption. A soft sob broke out near the back. An elderly woman, face wet with tears, buried her face in her hands. She had once signed the petition supporting Karen without question. One by one, like a slow ripple across a still pond, others followed. Tears, shaking heads, the slow realization that they had been complicit, unknowingly feeding a system rotten to the core. Karen Mitchell sat frozen. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Every polished defense she had rehearsed died in her throat when faced with undeniable evidence. And worse, the eyes of those who once cheered for her now turned cold with betrayal. Serena looked straight at Karen, not with hatred, not even contempt, but with the calm certainty of someone who had survived the worst this system could throw at her. A community, Serena said, turning back to face the room, is not built through sameness. It is built through respect for difference. If we continue to look away, if we let fear and prejudice lead us, Red Maple Grove won't need enemies to destroy it. We'll destroy it ourselves. Applause broke out. First, a few hesitant claps, then a rolling wave growing stronger, unstoppable. Karen bowed her head, her hands clenched tightly on her lap, her entire body trembling under the unbearable weight of the truth. She knew it was over. No clipboard would save her now. No speech, no spin, only the raw, unfiltered exposure of who she truly was, a reflection too ugly even for her to face. That night, Red Maple Grove didn't just witness the downfall of one individual. They witnessed the awakening of an entire community. And Serena Brooks, the black woman once surveilled, once threatened, once treated as less than human, stood tall, unwavering, proven to everyone that truth, no matter how long it is buried, always finds a way to rise into the light. The verdict came down in a room so thick with tension it felt like the walls themselves were sagging under the weight of years of lies, finally dragged into the light. The chairperson's voice rang out, clear, steady, slicing through the heavy air like a blade. Karen Mitchell, based on the findings of this community hearing and the undeniable evidence presented, you are hereby removed from your position as president of the Red Maple Grove Homeowners Association. Criminal charges regarding the embezzlement of HOA funds and acts of discriminatory conduct will be forwarded to the district attorney's office. No applause, no cheers. Only a heavy, punishing silence, a community staring into the mirror, forced to confront the collective negligence they had so long ignored. Karen Mitchell remained frozen in her seat, her hands gripping the armrests as if clinging to a life raft in a storm. No amount of makeup could mask the pallor of her skin, the sheer panic bleeding through every careful layer of her facade. The moral mask she had so meticulously crafted over the years shattered, piece by piece, revealing the shriveled pettiness and greed underneath. She stood on unsteady legs, stumbling away from the chairman's table. As she moved, her clipboard, once the symbol of her authority, the instrument of countless petty punishments, slipped from her grasp and clattered onto the floor with a hollow, final thud. No one moved to pick it up. No one called her back. All eyes simply watched her retreat, a small broken figure shrinking down the aisle, stripped of all the invisible power she had once wielded with such casual cruelty. Some turned their faces away, not out of pity, but because they could not bear to witness such a complete and public collapse. Others stood stone still, letting the tide of betrayal and anger wash silently over them. Serena Brooks said nothing. She stood tall, unwavering, like a monument in a storm. Her eyes followed Karen's retreat, not with hatred, not with satisfaction, but with the cold, clear understanding that corrupt systems rarely need to be toppled. They eventually collapse under the weight of their sins. The clipboard rolled once, then came to rest at Serena's feet. She stooped, picked it up. What was once a weapon of control, a catalog of infractions and fabricated rules, was now nothing but dead paper, soulless, meaningless. Serena set it quietly on the chairman's table, closing the darkest chapter of Red Maple Grove's history without fanfare. But she knew the wounds Karen left behind would not heal overnight. They had burrowed deep into every wary glance, every hesitant handshake, every door half shut in fear. Red Maple Grove would have to relearn trust, rebuild from the broken pieces, day by painstaking day. Karen's last desperate gasp came soon after. She filed a lawsuit against Serena and the residents who had stood against her, accusing them of defamation, community disruption, and damaging her reputation. The lawsuit, carefully typed, full of flowery legal jargon, was Karen's final attempt to wear the mask of dignity. But this time, she stood alone. Red Maple Grove, once tattered under her invisible knives, had awakened. The residents united, hired attorneys, and filed countersuits. New evidence poured out: murky invoices, racist emails, secret recordings of closed-door meetings. When Karen walked into the courthouse, dressed in a somber gray suit, her face painted meticulously to project an image of strength, it fooled no one. Her stiff gait, her hollowed eyes, the white-knuckled grip on her handbag, all screamed defeat. The trial moved swiftly, cleanly, like a blade through rock. The court dismissed Karen's claims, affirming that exposing the truth was not defamation but a public service, and that the evidence against her was both legal and damning. Worse still, the court ordered Karen to repay every cent she had stolen from the HOA, plus damages to those she had harmed, a financial reckoning she had never imagined while casually signing off on her misdeeds. When the judgment was read, Karen collapsed into her chair, her hands trembling, her once proud hair wilting over tear-streaked cheeks. It wasn't remorse that broke her. It was the unbearable bitterness of losing the only thing she had ever truly worshipped: power. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Flashbulbs popped, microphones thrust forward, but Serena did not rush to the podium. She stood back, watching the scene, watching the residents of Red Maple Grove, now holding hands, smiling freely, standing together in a way they never had before. A reporter held out a microphone expectantly. Serena smiled. Small, soft, a smile not of conquest, but of peace. "It wasn't me who won," she said, her voice low but carrying. It was the truth that was finally seen. And in those few words there was grief, forgiveness, and a quiet message that true justice isn't about crushing an enemy. It's about rebuilding the trust that was broken. Sometimes to win, you don't have to scream. You only have to stand firm, unyielding, and let the light of the truth speak for itself. That spring, Red Maple Grove shed its old skin like a parched field revived by the season's first rain. The rigid regulations and suffocating covenants Karen Mitchell and her regime had used to maintain an unspoken purity were stripped away one by one, like dust being swept from a long-sealed room. The HOA was rebuilt from the ground up. This time, the election was open, transparent, a true democratic process where every resident, regardless of race, nationality, or faith, had an equal voice. Gone were the invisible standards of community aesthetics, the cold nods that silently judged who deserved to belong. Instead, Homes once painted in mandatory muted tones now burst with vibrant colors under the sun. Yellows, blues, reds, each one a quiet declaration of life blooming anew. Children, chalk drawings on sidewalks. Wooden chairs returned to front lawns where families gathered in the cool afternoons, talking under the shade of green, thriving trees. Families who had once been driven away trickled back. The Sings returned from out of state. The Gomez family found their dream home on Elderberry Lane. New families arrived, Black, Asian, immigrant, and more, filling the once vacant spaces left by fear and division. Serena Brooks, unanimously nominated to lead the new HOA, simply smiled and declined. She knew her fight had reached its end, not by seizing power, but by opening the door to something better. Her mission had never been to sit atop a throne. It was to restore the true meaning of community, and then quietly step aside, trusting others to keep the flame alive. One golden afternoon, Serena sat on the porch with her parents, wrapped in the kind of peaceful air they had fought so long, so hard, to breathe freely again. Walter Brooks rocked gently in his chair near the bird feeder he had crafted by hand, watching sparrows dart and chirp in the cool spring air. Evelyn Brooks knitted quietly, lifting her eyes now and then to smile at a particularly bold robin perched on the railing. Serena leaned back, letting the breeze thread through her hair. The bird feeder swung gently in the wind, scattering the cheerful music of wings and whistles across the porch. Life had returned. Unforced, unmeasured, undeniable. The Black Lives Matter flag still flew alongside the faded stars and stripes. There were no more sidelong glances, no more whispered judgments, only silent, unmistakable acknowledgement. This country belongs to all who love it with an honest heart, not just to those who drape its flag around their prejudices. As the sky flared red and gold with sunset, Serena felt a deep, quiet gratitude. Gratitude for the struggles endured, the losses mourned, and the victories earned not through domination, but through resilience. That evening, around the dinner table, Serena made her announcement. "I'm rejoining the Special Operations Unit," she said simply, warmly. "I've requested redeployment." Walter looked at her, his weathered eyes shining with unspoken pride. Evelyn squeezed Serena's hand, her touch warm and steady, carrying a silent blessing. Serena smiled, a real smile, full of light. "Now," she said, "I can go without worry. I know you're living in a place that's truly home." The next morning, as she packed her duffel bag, Serena paused on the front porch. She stood a moment longer, gazing out over the small but vibrant stretch of red maple grove. Homes in a riot of colors, laughter bouncing down the sidewalks, children on bikes, dogs chasing each other across thick green lawns. A real community had been born, not through fear but through shared hope. No more clipboards regulating the height of grass, no more eyes deciding who was fit to live here. Only people, flawed, beautiful, diverse, building something together. As Serena climbed into the car bound for the airport, she turned for one last look. A lark burst upward from the old oak tree, singing pure and clear into the morning sky. Serena smiled. A true dawn had come to Red Maple Grove, and though she would leave, she carried it with her, a living reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person to stand firm and an entire land can be saved. Red Maple Grove found its dawn again, not through miracles, but through the quiet resolve of those who dared to stand against the darkness. Serena Brooks proved that justice is not the roar of a crowd in the town square, but the silent footsteps that carve a path toward a brighter tomorrow. And you, what would you choose? When faced with injustice, will you bow your head or light a lamp to guide the way? If this journey has touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep the stories of courage and change echoing far and wide.